Ultimately, they found that there was really no significant difference in the first two groups that I mentioned as far as the risk reduction of things like atrial fibrillation, heart attack, heart failure, those major events that we're looking for.
No kidding.
And so instead of getting into all the numbers, I mean, that's the punchline.
Wow.
Yes.
This is Generation Health. Every week, we bring you the latest in news, cutting-edge research, and time-tested best practices, helping you live a longer, healthier life. Sitting opposite me, Dante DiMatteo, PharmD, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. How are you, my friend?
Doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Behind mic number 3, Josiah Schweinberg, Engineer Extraordinaire. How are you?
Doing well. Good to be here.
My name is Tyler Andrews, and I am the host. Dante, what are we talking about?
We are going to talk about weekend warriors.
I like warfare. Is that what it's about? Are we? No?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
What were we discussing last time we recorded? Pre-recording?
We were talking about your training.
Oh, no. We're not supposed to be bringing that back up.
Oh, we're not?
You can't actually hold me to the full marathon training.
People were dropping comments.
Oh, you didn't start. You didn't start yet.
Put pressure in the comments, guys.
Oh,
make sure Josiah knows.
Oh, jeez.
What are you talking about?
We were talking about some war event.
Oh, probably the Bolshevik Revolution. Were you talking about that?
Was it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, we were talking about the Bolshevik.
We were talking about that yesterday.
Things I talk about it a lot. There's a lot to talk about. Yeah. I was talking and you were listening very kindly. Let's change the subject.
I remember the Bolsheviks from freshman year of college.
Yeah. Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, right? And then lots of people died. But first, what is happening behind the counter? The menstrual cycle isn't just about hormonal changes. A new study shows that hormonal fluctuations can actually reshape the brain itself. Researchers at UC Santa Barbara tracked 30 women throughout their menstrual cycles. But in addition to the expected hormonal level changes, the team took MRI scans during each of the menstrual phases, menses, ovulation, and the mid-luteal phases. They found that the brain's white and gray matter volumes, as well as cerebrospinal fluid, changed along with the hormonal levels. While there have been previous studies showing how hormonal fluctuations affect the brain and its communication during different tasks, things like that, this is the first study to show changes to the brain's physical structure. Of course, these findings have profound implications for our understanding of the hormonal cycle-related mental health issues like PMDD. If you want more about that, check out episode 4 of this show. But this particular study didn't venture into that territory. They weren't trying to figure all that stuff out. Nevertheless, this does pave the way for future studies to explore the precise effects these physical changes have on things like cognition, mood, and behavior. Considering that the average woman will have something like 450 of these cycle changes in their life affecting the physical structure of the brain, it will undoubtedly lead to some important discoveries about how the brain changes throughout a woman's life. And 40 is the new 50. At least the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force says so. They have updated the recommendations for breast cancer screenings, previously recommended to begin at age 50. The task force has announced that screenings should now begin at age 40 and be done at least every other year. The change reverses the longstanding guidance that biannual mammograms didn't need to start until 50 in light of significant increases in breast cancer in women under 50. Those rates have been climbing by roughly 3% every year. These recommendations are generally considered best practices by physicians and are typically implemented immediately. Anyone between ages 45 and 50 years old will have had some experience with this, as last year they recommended that colonoscopy screenings begin at 45 instead of 50. Breast cancer is the most common cancer, as well as the most common cause of cancer-related death among women in the United States. Black women are at an even greater risk. They have a 40% higher likelihood of death from breast cancer than Caucasian women. So this is very, very important for them as well. On a personal note, I wish this change had been made earlier. My mother died at 51 from breast cancer. So ladies, please do not skip these screenings. It is very, very important. All right. That's what I've got. Dante, weekend warfare. What are we talking about? Sharpening axes.
Weekend warriors.
Oh, okay.
What'd you say? Weekend warfare.
I think I like weekend warfare better.
Look, I need to get motivated.
Yeah, we're talking all about weekend warfare.
I'm into it.
I do this every weekend with my kids, getting them out to sports, get your soccer cleats on, your flag football stuff.
That's right. You got to get them
It's
armored
just
up.
Warfare.
Yeah.
Warfare all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's funny you say that because in unpacking a lot of this weekend warrior discussion around exercise, ultimately is what this is about. There's a million definitions of what a weekend warrior is.
Yeah.
So are we talking about somebody who they just concentrate all of their physical activity to 1 or 2 days a week as opposed to evenly distributing it throughout the other 5? So
not necessarily weekend in that
Yes.
sense, but just really doing it all on a couple of days.
Yes.
Okay.
And oftentimes I think that the definition that we will roll with are truly those that, confine most of their physical activity to the weekends. That's not when their 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 is taking place.
Right.
And so Saturday and Sunday, they have ample time to do all of the things that they hope to do.
That makes sense.
So back to the original point here. So in looking at self-reported data of the most common barriers to exercise participation, the lack of time consistently sits near the top.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it isn't just this lack of time that prevents people from participating. It is the certain way of thinking that accompanies that often hinders action.
What do you mean?
Well, I only have 1 or 2 days a week during the week with some extra time, and that can't possibly be enough to get me healthier or stronger or whatever the stated goal is. I was in great shape in my early 20s when I had tons of extra time that allowed me to exercise 3, 4, maybe even 5 times a week. I've heard many iterations of this that basically reflect the all or nothing approach. And so truly it is the lack of time that makes it difficult. Plus there's that, well, I can only do it at this time anyway, so I might as well do something else.
Right.
This isn't even going to matter.
Yeah.
This 30 minutes that I have right now, this hour, it's not going to do anything in the grand scheme.
Right.
That is a complex problem, I think, to unpack. And I think in some of the remote coaching that I've done, I've heard this time and time again. And I think part of my early failures in working with people were not being malleable enough with somebody's schedule to say that, hey, if Saturday and Sunday or Sunday and Monday or Friday and Saturday, if those literally are the only 1 or 2 days that you can give to physical activity in a dedicated, structured manner, that's perfect. We'll work with that. Beforehand, I was thinking in this optimization mentality.
Sure.
Where in a perfect world, we evenly distribute all this volume, all this exercise throughout the course of the week so that you can recover really well and you can hit all these different patterns.
Right.
And you build the best physical version of yourself and you check all these boxes. And look, that's realistic for me because that's also my hobby at this point and amongst other factors. But for the vast majority of people, I just want to make it clear that this is what we're talking about. We're addressing, which is a large percentage of people who have limited resources and time to devote to this.
Yeah. Without question, I have a very tight schedule. I've got 4 kids. My kids have activities between working, doing all of this stuff and getting my kids to all the places they need to be at, making sure that they have the strong physical foundation. My youngest son just started doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Well, that's at minimum 3 days a week. And I have to drive him there and then come pick him up again. And even if it's only 15 minutes each direction, 15 there, 15 back, 15 there, 15 back. That's an hour out of my day that I have to dedicate to just transporting that child to one place. That doesn't include taking my daughter to school. That doesn't include if, God forbid, I should want to do something fun.
Yeah.
There is not a lot of time in a given day, and the demands of life seem to keep mounting.
Yeah.
But you're saying that's not an excuse in the sense that if you've got a couple of days, you can still make a dent.
Ultimately, yes.
Okay.
And not even, I hate to even use the word excuse. If that's your reality and what you have to give right now is 1 or 2 days per week, that is more than enough time to move the needle with your health and your performance, really.
Okay.
And so I think ultimately the sentiment that comes out of this initial discussion is something we always say anytime exercise comes up. Or anytime that we talk about it with anybody, it's always the idea that something is always going to be better than nothing. And that applies universally, whether you want to read more or you want to, make better decisions at the grocery store or cook your own food more or sleep more, whatever the case, there's always as far as habit building goes and all that sort of thing, starting somewhere is always what's most important. I think this just crystallizes that a little better. We can give some recommendations. We can give some people some reassurance as to having an abnormal structure around exercise is okay. So the question we seek to answer, can weekend warrior types benefit from exercise as much as those with a more evenly distributed pattern of physical activity?
Okay. And there's some studies about this. That's what we're getting into?
There are. And at the outset with those studies, from my understanding, most of them point to the direction, like we said, something is better than nothing. If it's 2 days in a row, if it's a 1 3-hour day of exercise,
right?
Just the fact that you're doing the work is ultimately what's most important.
Right. Because the recommendation is 150 minutes a week.
Yes.
So if you try and cram all that in, that's what we're talking about.
Pretty much.
Okay. All right.
Pretty much.
So give me the studies. Tell me some details.
So the first study was from July of 2023. It's accelerometer-derived weekend warrior physical activity and incident cardiovascular disease. So
great name.
And they're always beautifully written. So accelerometer-derived, which we've talked about, those are just wearables.
Right.
Depending on the device, they can detect if you're swimming or biking or based on certain the way you move about your axes, that sort of thing. Okay. So they used the accelerometer to detect individuals' activity patterns. And then they also, in looking at cardiovascular disease, look to see if a more evenly distributed pattern of those actually aerobic guidelines, that's all this is in reference to, is just that 150 minutes to 300 minutes that you mentioned.
Yep.
Does this change the benefits towards reducing the risk for things like heart failure and heart attack, stroke, all of those cardiovascular events? Which one is better? Which one is worse? Is there a difference? How does this compare to those that have an inactive pattern?
Okay.
And so that's the question that they looked to solve ultimately. They broke the individuals into 3 groups. The first group were those individuals with 50% of their activity occurring over just 1 or 2 days. And then the other group was just those who had a more evenly spread. They still accomplished the 150 plus minutes per week over the course of a week. Mm-hmm. And then there were those who had activity less than that threshold of 150 minutes. And so ultimately they found that there was really no significant difference in the first 2 groups that I mentioned as far as the risk reduction of things like atrial fibrillation, heart attack, heart failure, those major events that we're looking for.
No kidding.
And so instead of getting into all the numbers, that's the punchline.
Wow.
Yes.
I assumed that there would be obviously some benefit, but you're saying there's functionally not any significant statistical difference.
Exactly. And so what does that mean? Do you just run home and start telling people who cares? Skip what you were doing during the week, just cram it all in on the weekend, right? And you'll be fine. Look, again, there's when we bring up these papers like this, and again, this was a meta-analysis. This was a retrospective analysis, huge data set of individuals. And So it does carry some weight. But again, this is not discussing resistance training. This is not talking about the other side of the guidelines that we encourage individuals meet. This is just proving the fact that suboptimal schedule arrangement doesn't really make a huge difference if you're looking to achieve health benefits of aerobic activity.
The ASCVD
basically.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. So that, I mean, there were certainly some downsides with this study in particular. Although the data from each person was extracted from the accelerometers, they only took this data over the course of 1 week. And so the study spanned multiple years, but each person that participated, they only got information, again, from a 1 week period. Okay. And so what does this say? You know you're wearing an accelerometer. You could have easily modified your behavior going into the study. And so you could have changed the pattern of the things you were doing. You could have done a little, I know that that's one of the benefits that we mention when we talk about wearable devices, is that for maybe a temporary amount of time, it might incentivize you to do a few more pull-ups or go out for an extra walk, or whatever the case. And so I think that certainly that could have happened in this cohort.
So if it doesn't make any difference, is there any reason for me to spread it out throughout the week?
So again, because we're looking at just sort of one sliver of this whole pie, again, the outcomes that they were looking at were cardiovascular disease.
Right.
Now, why exercise? Why be physically active if it's not moving the needle for your health? And specifically, with as prevalent as cardiovascular disease is worldwide, that's why a study like this is so important, that it gives you reassurance that an abnormal pattern can still move the needle.
Right.
But in your question, there are still many other considerations to whether, is there an advantage to cramming everything into 1 or 2 days? My opinion is no.
Right.
Is there necessarily an advantage to spreading it out 20 minutes a day over the course of the week if you have the time, as opposed to 2 longer sessions on the weekend? I don't think so either. The one consideration would be if you're somebody just getting started, and again, the weekends, Saturday, Sunday are all that you have to get started. That is more than enough to get 150 plus minutes.
Yeah.
Total per week. Now, would you start there? Would you start with 75-minute sessions? But if you're kind of starting from zero, so to speak, that's where I think the load management, or how much can you tolerate, sort of factors in. Mm-hmm. So if we step outside of this cardiovascular disease risk box and we just say, what about all the other things?
Right.
That's I think a nice segue into the second study.
Okay.
So if you ultimately switched gears and you said, now I want to start training for a half marathon, or I want to run a 5K, or I want to run a full marathon. Mm-hmm. Imagine logistically what that looks like for people. You generally, right, Josiah, you need 3+ days a week on your feet in order to start to build the requisite volume to be able to run a distance like that. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're running a 5K, 3 miles, just over 3 miles, I think that, go for it. If you can devote Saturdays and Sundays, and that's going to be the bulk of your exercise to move you towards a shorter race like that, that's fine. But I think, to be clear, as you start to trickle in some of these performance oriented goals, which again, I think most people, once they get started, kind of catch the bug. Yeah. They need to tie their efforts to something. Am I getting faster? Is this helping me? I can run this race. This looks appealing. I want a medal. I want to be on a leaderboard. I think nobody thinks that they are like that until the wheels really start to spin. And so I kind of back to my original point here. Imagine what that would look like trying to cram in 3 days of running or 3 or 4 days of running into just 2 days or 1 day on a weekend for somebody who maybe just hasn't spent that amount of time on their feet. I think that if you flip this too fast into this approach of condensing your activity too fast to a very short time window, that's where you start to see, my opinion is that's where maybe some of the overuse and the aches and the pains and the not recovering real well starts to factor in.
Okay, so if I understand what you're saying don't let the weekend warrior thing stop you, but it's probably not the goal in terms of it's not the best way to improve performance or get those serious gains.
Yeah.
That it's a great way to start, and it's a wonderful thing to do if that's the only option. But
it could lend itself to being a perfect entry point.
Yeah.
It really could.
Yeah.
And again,
you're not making this isn't a recommendation for if you're already working out 5 days a week. Don't switch to 2 days a week.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And just again, to be clear, I wanted to mention that study first on purpose.
Okay.
Because again, in my mind, if you can tie exercise and the things that you're doing physically to the benefits to your health that you're gaining, if you can tie those things together, that is one little nugget that can help to keep people coming back. So you can exercise on just the course of a 1 or 2 day span. Again, 150 plus minutes over to average over the course of a week. You can get that in 2 days, and you can still realize many of the health benefits associated with aerobic activity.
Very cool.
Very like in a very specific way. That's why I kind of wanted to hit that first. Why do any of this if it's not going to benefit your health?
Right. That makes sense. Okay. All right, cool.
So that's one piece.
What's the second study?
So the second one it again approaches the same question in a slightly different way. This second study is from this year, and it's looking at physical activity patterns and body fat distribution via DEXA.
Okay.
So we're still talking about the relationship of physical activity to your health, but we're talking about how does this change maybe how somebody's accumulating or not body fat.
Okay.
Actually, what was the title of this?
It's long.
I know.
The associations of weekend warrior and regularly active physical activity with abdominal and general adiposity in U.S. adults.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah. So so similar to the first study, they also pulled from a very large data set that they already have for a huge population, except in the NHANES, it's individuals in the United States.
Okay. The first study was UK. This one's US.
Yes. They use that data to assess the effects of physical activity distribution on measures of body fat. And in this study, they were categorized as either inactive, regularly active, which reflects that more evenly distributed pattern, and weekend warriors, those who are active but only just 1 to 2 days a week. Both of the in a very parallel manner, the lower body fat metrics were seen in both of the active groups.
Wow.
Not a major difference between the patterns.
Yeah.
And of course, those who were inactive, there was a much more significant difference. So why look at another paper like this? Again, there's the pie is large. There are many ways to measure health. And we know that looking at the way that individuals accumulate fat, where fat depositions are and such, we see higher or lower associations with metabolic risk, impaired glucose tolerance, hyperglycemia, hypertriglyceridemia, all of which increase the risk for diabetes and cardiovascular disease.
Sure.
So very much along the same vein of health metrics that we care about. We know that individuals who are more active, who consistently are meeting the aerobic guidelines, that threshold we've mentioned time and time again, are better able to maintain healthier levels of body fat.
Right.
And so some of the way that they did this as in contrast to the first paper, this one looked at self-reported data. So they used it's called the GPAC. They use a validated questionnaire basically to examine somebody's their activity patterns.
Okay, so it wasn't an accelerometer worn for 1 week.
Right.
It's self-reported, but theoretically over a longer period of time.
Exactly.
Okay.
And interestingly, they only looked at leisure time activity, and they did not incorporate work-related physical activity. Okay. So leisure time as in any time that is dedicated to an specific activity, walking, running, jogging, climbing, gardening, not moving cinder blocks at work. Right. So even though that's certainly physical
activity, absolutely.
Yes. And so they distinguished that, and they only counted physical activity in bouts that were 10 minutes or greater.
Okay.
And right off the top, you're probably wondering how in the heck can these questionnaires be accurate? You know what I mean?
I was wondering right off the top, how can these questionnaires even be accurate?
So there certainly are limitations to, recall data anytime you're asking somebody what foods are they eating,
right? How
much activity are they doing? How many steps did they get? How far did they walk? There's inherent, no matter what you do, there's inherent limitations there.
Yeah, self-reporting is.
That doesn't mean we just throw it out the window. I still think it gives us an adequate snapshot.
Yeah.
But in general, they also saw that the weekend warrior types had higher work-related physical activity as well. So although they weren't including that in what they counted towards the 150 minutes,
right?
They still they looked at it for many different reasons. This was a very thorough, rigorous, as far as trying to make sure that this data actually is still pointing in the direction that they thought. But again, weekend warrior types, higher work-related physical activity. So in general, they were still active during the week because of the demands of their career. Plus, they had more intense sessions when the weekend came around. And so it does speak to kind of the avatar that we're talking about here. You know what I mean? Yep. So there's something to be said about having an active job.
Sure.
Maybe not having the energy or the time to do anything additionally physical after your active job.
Yeah.
And then to still push it that's awesome to still push it on the weekends or on the 1 to 2 days that you have the time, and still have these specific markers of health that are very similar, if not better, than those with the evenly distributed patterns.
Yeah. I'm reminded immediately of a good friend of mine, Skylar, that is...
He's my friend too now.
He is your friend too now. Skylar was a UPS.
He was my friend.
He can be.
Jeez.
Skylar, drop a line to Josiah. I'll give you his number. Skylar was a UPS driver, and I remember through the summer, especially in Nashville, that's not a pleasant task. And he was getting like 20 and 25,000 steps easily every day. I can't imagine him getting done doing that for 8 hours and then going, you know what I want to do now? I think I want to go for a run.
Yep.
That's not a thing. But he was absolutely active on the weekends. So you're speaking directly to those people. But the other thing that's nice is that I would imagine this distribution, tracking that data, you're going to have some of those people in each of those categories.
Right.
So it kind of evens that out to some extent.
Right.
And again, the punchline of that study was whether you're a weekend warrior or evenly distributed, your adipose tissue was lower than the folks who just didn't exercise at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And there are certainly confounders there. Those that are still more active in general probably have a higher general interest and motivation with health and diet. And also there is a certain demographic that a lot of these individuals fall into. Generally, they're more affluent, they live in better areas, they have higher income. All of those sorts of things factor into the way that this observational data often shakes itself out.
Sure.
Just, more or less mentioning that. But what was your point? But yeah, to your point,
just that it doesn't, in terms of adiposity, it doesn't matter. The point of the study was that it didn't make any difference whether it was on the weekend or spread out.
Yeah. Now, there is some data, a little bit of a tangent that shows that, so then if you wanted to maybe look at a subset of this more closely, looking at leisure time physical activity versus work-related physical activity, there are still generally better outcomes in those that still take the time to do the extra leisure time activity instead of relying upon what's done at their physical job. And so it's not to discount or discourage what an individual does at work.
Right.
It's just that most of the observational data in that realm, comparing those two groups specifically, we can say that it's better to we can say that it's generally not enough to just rely on your work-related physical activity. And sure, that it varies. 25,000 steps a day is huge, regardless.
Yeah.
But then it also speaks to how you begin to adapt to a given stimulus. 25,000 steps sounds like a whole heck of a lot to us. And for him, once he was in the mix, I'm sure at this point he could probably say, yeah, I was used to it. It wasn't that bad. Sure, I didn't want to go squat after, but in general, I could go to baseball games and go to grocery shopping and I can live my life after that. Whereas if us three walk 25,000 steps tomorrow, our calves would be would
lock
explode.
Up.
Yeah. And male men and same sort of thing. But in general, the encouragement here is to, regardless of how active your job is, still view leisure time activity in its sort of own separate bucket. There's still benefits to be realized from
Absolutely. That. Very cool. So no matter where you're at, start there, start exercising. If you can only do it 2 days a week, that's okay. Just get after it.
That's right. I think to wrap up some of this discussion, notice we didn't talk at all about resistance training. So again, both of these studies, they were talking about measures of health, those related to cardiovascular disease, and also body composition, body fat distribution, essentially, adiposity. What about how does resistance training, fit into this? And I would not want to lose sight of that in this discussion. We want to encourage ultimately people to do more than what's recommended in the guidelines, and, not all at once, but certainly build yourself up to a point where you can move beyond what's recommended. Because again, there are health benefits to be realized beyond that 150-minute cutoff. So
have there been any studies on weightlifting for 2 days a week?
There might be, but not necessarily in this exact context.
Okay.
So the studies that I'm thinking of are those in, as we mentioned kind of at the outset, there's still the performance side of this discussion. And so many of those studies look at how did frequency of resistance training affect hypertrophy, how large your muscles got, how did it affect strength, how did it affect performance in certain things. And so while much of that is related to health, it certainly falls more into that optimization category. And so what most of those studies that, again, they're not necessarily looking at weekend warriors, but they're looking at, okay, what if I took, one day a week frequency of resistance training and I compared that to 3 days a week resistance training? Well, over the long term, the 3 day a week individuals, their muscles grew larger, they got stronger. I would say pretty common sense.
Sure.
Now, what if we took the same amount of volume, so the same amount of sets and reps in the 3 day group or whatever, and applied it to a 1 or 2 day group? What's the difference? Well, in most of those, what they call them volume matched studies. So anytime the volume is equal, for the most part, you see those measurements of muscle thickness, muscle size, muscle strength, all of those things, they start to come out in the wash.
Wow.
And so it's a good thing. It's what gives people flexibility. Again, not everybody has the time to be a full-time bodybuilder. So it gives people flexibility that I know if I can just get this amount of squats and this amount of curls and this amount of whatever into a 2 or 3 day window, that I can accomplish just as much as I could if I spread this out over 5 or 6 days.
Right.
For the most part. Now,
The recovery is going to suck though.
Exactly. So there's always a practical component to this. Like, how does this come out in the wash? If you're working with somebody with their exercise program, or if you're just, muddling your way through your own experience in the gym, how you feel after you just started squatting for the first time, or all of a sudden you're doing 3 sets of 10 on a, leg press or leg extension.
Yeah.
The carryover from session to session can kind of start to accumulate. You're accumulating stress intentionally. And so certainly this is where a coach comes in. This is where programming comes in. This is where a little more thoughtfulness comes in, because it's sure we're concerned about our muscle size. Is it going up? Muscle strength, is it going up? Yes. Okay. We're concerned about those things, but how does it feel during the actual experience? How many times did you have to take off because you were too sore or you were too injured, or all of a sudden your hips bothering you or your shoulder injury flared back up?
Yeah.
All of those things. I think a lot of that gets lost. There's only so much that can be taken out of a research setting. So being thoughtful in, just because I can realize a lot of these health benefits by shifting the load to the weekend, that doesn't mean if I had 6 sets of squats during the week that all of a sudden I just do 6 sets on Sunday now.
Right.
I think that there's still a thoughtful way to get to that. But again, it's just this conversation. I hope what people are getting out of this is it grays a little bit. It blurs a little bit as you start to say, hey, I want to run a full marathon. Hey, I want to do a powerlifting meet. Hey, I want to compete in CrossFit. Or hey, you know what? I want to do high rocks or whatever this like gamified version of fitness is.
Yeah.
Or I want to be better at intramural basketball or whatever the case is. It gets a little tricky as we sort of meld some of the performance oriented goals.
That makes sense. And Josiah, I'm thinking about music. Like, you can spend 6 hours practicing once a week, or you could spend 1 hour practicing 6 times a week. And generally speaking, in terms of performance, you're probably going to get more out of the spread out thing, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, what do they say? Consistency is key.
Right.
All of these one-liners I think are, but again, it's, the overall takeaway of this is just get going.
Yeah. Start where you're at.
There's increased improvement, cardiovascular, there's increased improvement in your body makeup, like just get going. But, not to belabor, just kind of chew up and reiterate what's already been said. I think anytime it's PR, like what's my personal best, or like, let me push myself, let me figure out, what I'm doing. It's got to move beyond the 2 days a week. You know what? I did have a question, unless we want to keep going on something else.
No, go for it.
I see online all the time. People are like, oh, you don't just run all the time. You need to know your body. Yeah, your body makeup. Everybody has a different way. So I'd be curious, like based on these studies, when they were like having people self-report, hey, here's how much I lost, or here's my waist circumference, which I think was one of the things, it was one of the determining results or factors. Is that based on people's body makeup? Is that a thing? Is that all just like hype that people try to sell?
Are you asking, is there a certain prescription for those with a different body type? Or
I'll take this quiz to figure out your body type.
Dude, that's oh man.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
So a lot of what I'll say is a lot of the training think tank included, like a lot of the companies and athletes and sort of people in the space that I listen to, that's sort of the stuff that they'll they're not shy about picking apart.
Yeah.
I hesitate to do some of that, but that gimmicky sort of, hey, if you look this way, this might be better for you.
Yeah.
There might be some merit to like a very tiny, small percentage of it. But if anything, I still think it just closes the door for people to actually take action.
Yeah.
You know, if all of a sudden you see this quiz that says, if you're this body type, this might be better. And all you have access to is the walkway outside your house. And you're
Right.
like, all of a sudden now you're not going to walk or run because this thing said that you'd be better suited waiting, or, you know, you should ride this recumbent bike instead. Well, then guess what? The person never did anything.
There's more limits.
Yeah. Or, oh man, I really wanted to do Olympic weightlifting because I thought it looked really cool. But now after taking this quiz, it says I need to like put on more muscle mass first because of this. So I guess I'm just going to, you know, half-ass my way through a bodybuilding program.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, well, no, the person, they wanted to start weightlifting. So go weightlift. Who the heck cares? You'll be fine.
Absolutely.
You know, you're So that would be,
Sorry.
no, that's a great question.
The rebuttal to all those body type quizzes is the result from these tests.
Yeah.
Just get going. If it's something that interests you, just get going.
Yeah. Yeah. The other takeaway too, that I didn't want to forget is, sure, we talked about optimizing performance. Maybe your schedule has to look a little different if that's your goal. And then for health, yes, you can accumulate things in maybe a less suboptimal manner. But the other thing that's not directly addressed here are missed workouts or missed sessions. And so I think sometimes this hinders me personally. And I've seen this with people who I work with. And then if you're just a regular old person, you are going to have things unexpectedly pop up on your schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden you are exercising 1, 2, 3, 4 days a week, and you are following something. And then boom, something happens. Kids get sick. You're sick. You know, you have to work late. Your stereotypical things that pop up.
Life.
So you miss a day that had squats, and you miss a day that had running, or you miss the day that had walking. So what do? What this information lends itself to is that if you have to move this to Sunday, if you have time, look, skipping it is okay. It's okay to skip occasionally. If something happens and you just can't make it and it doesn't work, skip it. You'll just pick up where you left off.
The long arc is more important.
Again, another key sort of phrase that we bring up. The long arc is more important. The other side of that is, if you do have time, just tack it on to something else on the weekend. So if you were supposed to squat and you missed it, and then squats popped up again on Sunday, that doesn't necessarily mean you just do 3 more sets of squats, especially just knowing yourself, knowing what you can tolerate, and then also thinking about the longer arc, not doing anything that's going to hinder your long-term performance, but that you also want to still get some exercise in. There are so many strategies that I think can be extracted from this that can allow you to thoughtfully make your session a little longer on a Sunday if you have more time, or a Saturday if you have more time. Like, how could we ever discourage somebody from doing more physically if they have the time, than saying, you know what? Here's what I think you should do. I think you should skip that workout because it's going to hurt what you do on Sunday. And if it hurts what you do on Sunday, it's going to hurt what you were going to do on Monday.
Right.
It's like this super negative.
People get caught up in that.
It's like, just forget all that. Take some sort of middle ground approach. If you have more time, stay longer, do your thing. It should be fun, because if you're not having fun, you'll quit doing it anyway.
You're not going to do it anyway.
So get creative with adding the elements from the day that you missed into the day that you still have planned. Again, whether that's walking or that's some sort of bodybuilding exercise that you like to do. If you like to do it, who cares when you do it? You know what I mean? It's you're still better off banking those extra few sets, or banking those extra few miles on your feet, than just saying, oh, it was suboptimal.
Yeah.
I can't do this. I'm too worried. Just forget all that. Train as much as you want within reason, and sure, keep the long-term in mind, but also know that like you're probably better off banking a couple extra sets a week, even though it wasn't at 8 a.m. on Tuesday. Instead, it was at the end of the week.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. One thing that you cannot do all on the weekend and skip throughout the week is supplementation. If you are looking for any supplements, we have a whole bunch of them on our website. If you're bodybuilding, you need protein. We've got a great couple of protein supplements. We've got creatine. We've got multivitamins and omegas and all the rest, all there on our website. Go check it out, askjoedimatteo.com. That's askjoedimatteo.com. You can sign up for our mailing list there so you can find out when we have sales. They're all the time and they change up. You can find out past episodes of this show. You can find the show that started all this, the Ask Joe DiMatteo show, all there on our website, askjoedimatteo.com. If you have a question, we want to hear about it. Questions at askjoedimatteo.com. You guys don't have a microphone. You can't interrupt the flow of the show.
Is that a look to me?
No.
Wow.
No, you're good. You're
that
good.
was great.
You're good. But email us those questions. We want to hear them. Questions at askjoedimatteo.com. What else? Oh, show notes, the articles that Dante was referencing. Those are all going to be available down below in our show notes. Go check those out. Read them for yourself. Don't take our word for it. You want to check that out. And if you learn something from this, please pass it on to somebody you know, especially if you know somebody who's going, I just can't exercise because I can't do it 5 days a week. Here you go. You don't have to. Start where you're at. Start now. Pass this on to them. Rate the show. Give it 5 stars. Give it a thumbs up. All that stuff helps. Drop your comments and questions down below. We love all of that stuff, and we reply to every single one of them. Hopefully we don't stutter as much as I just did. All right. Big thanks, as always, Josiah Schweinberg, our engineer, Michael Deppish, the editor, Joyce Gibb, our nurse practitioner who handles private consultations, Diane Silverman, who manages product, Terry, who does scheduling, Cecilia, who does distribution. Whew, I gotta practice this some more. That's Dante DiMatteo. I'm Tyler Andrews. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next time.
The dramatic look.